Hello everyone, my name is Ilija, I'm a DC of Scottish Insurance, and I'm going to give you a workshop on Yugoslavia after the breakup. So what I'm going to talk about is mostly what was Yugoslavia and what happened to those countries that were part of that country and why they're not anymore part of Yugoslavia. I'm going to emphasize certain conflicts that happened there, as well as situation right now in those countries. If you have any questions, I believe there is a live place where you can live chat where you can ask questions. Also, if someone can't hear me or if there are some issues like that, please just let me know. Because obviously I can hear myself perfectly. I'm not sure whether it's the same for everyone. Okay, so I'm not going to go really back into history, but I think in order to understand the context of Yugoslavia, we need to talk about the first common country that South Slavs used to live under that. So after the World War I, Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes was created. It was basically if you think nowadays about countries like Serbia, Croatia, Slovenia, Bothnia Herzegovina, Macedonia, Montenegro, those countries were part of what was called Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes. Later on, it was renamed in Kingdom of Yugoslavia. It was the first country that had all those nations in one together, even though the idea existed before among some scholars and some people who wanted South Slavs to be united. But the first realization of that idea was that kingdom after the World War I. That country was constitutional monarchy, and the monarchs, the royal family, were Karađorđevići, which were Serbian royals. So I know that there are a lot of names that are hard to pronounce, maybe for people who don't speak some of South Slav languages. So I'm going to post the presentation with all the things after, so you can see those names in Google if you want to find out more and everything. The biggest problem with that country was centralization of power and a lack of representation of basically of non-Serbian people there. So what was the case? So as you see, firstly, the royals were Serbs, but moreover, from 40 to 45% of population in Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes were Serbs. That means that Serbs were had simply more power. That's why there were lots of demands from other parts of the country, mostly from Croats, but also from people who lived nowadays in Macedonia, to get more autonomy. So what happened is basically that there were lots of incidents that happened because someone wanted to get more autonomy. First might be the shooting in the parliament when Puniša Račić, one of the Serbian member of parliament, shot Stjepan Radić, that was Croatian, not just member of parliament, but just leader of Croats in Yugoslavia, and two other Croatian entities that happened in parliament, at the beginning of the 20th century. In 1929, the king of Yugoslavia just declared dictatorship. It's called 6th January dictatorship. It lasted for a couple of years. At that year, 1929, the movement of Ustasha in Italy was created. Ustasha movement was a movement of Croatian nationalists who wanted to have independent state of Croatia. The creator of that movement was Ante Pavelić. It was also leader of Croats in World War II. I'm going to get there in a second. Now, why this is important? Because those fractions, together with some fractions from Macedonia, BMRO, names don't matter here, that were helped by Bulgarians, were very influential for those minorities in Yugoslavia. In 1934, in Marseille, in just genuine visit to France, the king of Yugoslavia was assassinated by members of MMRO. So basically, for those reasons, it is important to understand that some sort of conflicts, mostly due to lack of representation, existed even before, like at the beginning of 20th century. After that, so just to give you some of the context, after that we had the World War II, where Yugoslavia was occupied by Axis power. So mostly, like lots of countries took some parts of Yugoslavia. Germany took most part of Serbia. What are important things are like two important things. One is Albania, like that was under influence of Italy or under occupation of Italy, basically, took lots of parts of Macedonia, Kosovo, and parts of Montenegro, in so-called Greater Albania. And also, more importantly, independent state of Croatia was declared. Independent state of Croatia had territories that nowadays consist of Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, some parts of Serbia. It was basically a Nazi puppet state. It was run by people like by Ustaše, by people who wanted to have independent state of Croatia that were mentioned a couple of things before, a movement that was that happened in 1929. World War II is really important for understanding Yugoslavia because there were lots of divisions within countries. Some of them were ethnic divisions, some of them were ideological, but all of them are really important to understand that in the future, all those people who were against each other are going to live under the same country, which is not going to be, like, spoiler alert, really, really good. So, like, there were many fractions that fought against each other. I'm going to just outline three, the most important, or at least the most powerful and most important for shaping national identity in the future. There were many others. You can check them. Obviously, not everything can just fit into one workshop, unfortunately. One of them were partisans that won the war. Those were communists. The second one were Chetniks, were Serbian royalists. And even then, there is some dispute to which extent Serbian royalists were collaborating with with Germany that occupied Serbia, to which extent they fought against them, because there were some battles where there were like direct cooperation between those two, like between Chetniks and Germans. But on the other hand, there were some like battles they fight against each other. So basically, it is really important to understand this, because lots of times historical narratives are manipulated by the countries in order to like boost your agenda and to whitewash your national identity and to say that others were bad. Third one are Ustaše explained that were secessionists, mostly Croatian nationalists. Why independent state of Croatia is important? It is important for a couple of reasons. Firstly, lots of places in independent state of Croatia were places where basically concentration camps were installed to those places, where Jews, Romans, and Serbs were, and Croats that were not collaborating with Ustaša movement, were prosecuted and killed. So basically, one of the biggest of those camps is Jasenovac. Now, it is really important because one of the things that is kind of one of the cleavages that exists right now in Yugoslavia, why people fight around some of the things, is interpretation of history. Now, there are different interpretations what Jasenovac exactly was. One of the interpretations it was concentration camp, where lots of, as I said, Romans, Jews, Serbs, and other non-collaborators were killed, tortured, etc. But however, there are many questions. Firstly, how many people died? So basically, there are some numbers that say that just 10,000 people were killed there. There are some numbers that go as much as 1,200,000 people. Like some of the official figures by like lots of sort of non-biased entities say around 100,000 people were killed there. Also, second thing is that there is interpretation that was work camp after the World War II, where Croats were killed by the communist regime. It's also one of the interpretations that is, as you can imagine, more favored in Croatia, while the former interpretation is more presented in Serbian curricula. Now, why this is important? Because if you have those issues like genocide, like literally massive killing of people, systematic destroying of people, to kill thirds of the people, we're going to just make thirds of the people leave our country, etc., etc. Mean that for those important events in your history, in your for your nation, it is really problematic when you don't have consensus between those two sides. So therefore, it is one of the important things to mention. Jasenovac concentration camp, there is a lot of disputes between narratives to which extent it was deadly, how dangerous it was, and who was still there, and who wasn't, and whether it was really genocide or not. Second thing that is important is the role of Catholic Church in those issues. Now, mostly in Serbian curricula, there is a narrative that Catholic Church was highly collaborating with Nazis and literally taking killing people who are not Catholics and just helping Ustaša regime to do that. On the other hand, there is a completely opposite narrative that exists mostly in Croatia, that the role of the Catholic Church was rather to stop those brutal killings. There is one person that has special importance. It's Alojzije Stepinac. He was a high figure in Catholic Church in Zagreb, in Croatia. Nowadays, he wants to be there is a strong movement to canonize and to make him a saint. And right now, as this workshop is taking place, and maybe 1 year before it started, there is sort of group of people from Serbian Orthodox Church and from Croatian Catholic Church that are having some sort of I don't know, true commission or something in Vatican. They want to find the facts whether Alojzije Stepinac was collaborating with the Ustaša regime or not, and whether that is going to be important in making him saint or not. So, as you can see, for some really important events, some figures are seen literally as saints. On one side, some people are seen as murderers. This is not the only case. There's one example that is really just important to know. So after the World War II, as I mentioned, partisans were one who won the war. They were communists. What was created was Socialist Federative Republic of Yugoslavia. It was, as you can imagine, Socialist Republic, Communist Republic. Basically communist dictatorship, but unlike other communist countries in Eastern Europe, it was sort of different, and that's why narratives or how Yugoslavia looked like and functioned are quite different. So there are a couple of things that you should know here. So firstly, something that I missed that part because I thought that probably everyone knows that, but just to emphasize. So in Yugoslavia, you have a couple of nations that live right now. Serbs are mostly Orthodox Christians, Croats are mostly Catholic Christians, Bosniaks are mostly Muslims. You also have lots of Albanians that were mostly Muslims, Macedonians that are Orthodox Christians, Slovenes that are Catholics, etc. Most of those people speak something that is said to be the same language. So either you call it Serbian, Croatian, Montenegrin, Bosnian, doesn't matter. But all of those people understand each other perfectly. And I think there is no any situation when someone from Montenegro will talk to someone from Croatia, let's say, with a translator or just anything like that. I think that some dialects in some of the countries are sometimes more different than some dialects from those different languages. Now, why those things are important? Because right now we're going to talk about creation of that Yugoslav national identity and how it was created in the Republic of Yugoslavia. I'm just going to call it Yugoslavia for simplicity and because it's shorter, you know. One figure that is really important is called Josip Broz Tito. So he was leader of partisans during World War II. After the victory, he was elected to be a lifelong president of Yugoslavia. He was very popular abroad. He had a foreign policy of neutrality. He was one of the founders of non-alignment movement, a movement that was supposed not to be neither with NATO, neither with Warsaw Pact. So despite the fact it was a socialist republic and communist republic, still it wasn't, it was sort of different than most of the countries in Eastern Europe. because of those non-alignments. Now, why is this important? Okay, I'm going to explain why this is important a little bit later. But let's see how exactly Yugoslav national identity was created. Thing number one is cult of Tito's personality. So you can imagine that everywhere there were just pictures of Tito doing really, really cool stuff, either playing with children or doing worker things or whatever. So like in every school there were things like that. His birthday was one of the national holidays, and basically Tito was really a thing back in Yugoslavia. Second thing that they say that it was a part of Yugoslav national identity was fight against fascism. This is something that was really emphasized as a really, really important thing. Thirdly, everyone was supposed to speak Serbo-Croatian language. That was, as I said, most of the South Slav nations understand each other perfectly. So they try to make like unified Serbo-Croatian language that was taught in every republic. Fourthly, there was one thing that was mandatory military service for men, which meant that lots of people from different republics were mixed in terms of if you take 1 or 2 persons from Slovenia, they do military service in Serbia, and they meet lots of people from the other countries. That might sound trivial, but this means that you actually meet lots of people from different republics, and you try to build your national identity with those people. Also, there were lots of voluntary actions. So, for example, when you had firstly, there was war, so there were lots of projects, lots of things to do in terms of infrastructure, but also there were some like bad things in terms of like earthquake in Macedonia that completely destroyed capital Skopje. There were lots of people who voluntarily went there to rebuild those cities, and again mixed from different republics. Also, other identities, national and religious identities, were undermined, and therefore everyone was able to be Yugoslav and to have that like umbrella identity. Also, something is really important. In every aspect of society, some system of quotas in terms of having people from different republics and different ethnicities and different religions participating either as high-ranking officials or some just even lower jobs, even admission to universities. If there is not anyone who is, for example, Albanian, there will be quota for them in order to try to maximize the interaction of people and just that everyone feels included. So those are the things, those are the ways how that national identity was tried to be created. As you can imagine, after World War II was really bloody, lots of people were not really happy living with each other. Some people were happy living with each other. Some people were not, if some people in that country committed genocide against your nation. So basically, it was important to have some sort of policies and some sort of narratives in order to try to boost that common national identity. The negative side of building the national identity is, like, as with any dictatorship. Firstly, after World War II, like just in aftermath, a lot of people were killed. And even right now, we don't know the exact numbers of people that were killed. So mostly those people were either people who were not who had different ideological affiliations than communism, or people who were collaborating with Nazis, or simply people who were Germans. There were a lot of Germans in northern parts of Serbia that don't live there right now. Some of them were killed, some of them were expelled, lots of their property was nationalized. This is something that was not only for Germans, but for most of the people. Just take your property in order to be able to redistribute some of those things. Also, the mass killing is just killings continued even after that. There were some places when people were just put simply because they there was allegation that they were against regime and undermining Yugoslavia. There was one specific place that is important. It's called Goli Otok, or like literal translation, Naked Island. It was somewhere in Adriatic Sea where people. It was like sort of a labor camp. People sent there simply for not, communist friendly. Lots of those trials were not fair at all. And this is something that is important to emphasize. Obviously, states try to like just cover those issues, and even right now, some of those mass graves are being discovered in Croatia and Slovenia mostly, because usually those are like, for example, mine that doesn't work for like 50 years, and just people are shown away down there. It's really, really hard to find all those bodies. You need to dig really, really deep, etc. It's really, really bloody, but like with every dictatorship. Second problem with Yugoslavia was the undermining of national and religious identities. And despite all those issues, still most of the people on census didn't say they were Yugoslavs, but rather that they were Serbs, Croats, Bosniaks, Muslims. Doesn't matter. Now, why does this matter? Like, for example, usually around, like, depends from the census, but usually around 5% of people would tell that their national identity is Yugoslav identity. Now, that means that usually it wasn't as successful. Also, as you can imagine, lots of people had some collective memory of what happened in wars before that. That's right. It's really easy to brainwash people to that extent. Yeah, another problem was like economic problems. And usually that is the problem with socialism. Eventually you run out of other people's money. Now, what does this mean? That firstly, economy of Yugoslavia was generally inefficient. It was mostly state-run. People generally just not working as hard as in most countries, as you can imagine. Second problem was that debt and trade deficit rose exponentially. And that's why at the beginning you had some growth, because there were lots of money coming either from direct aid. And as I mentioned before, Yugoslavia was like non-aligned. This means that there was aid from United States coming as well as from the East. This means that lots of money went to there. That's how it was easy to have some sort of growth, because lots of foreign currency came to your country despite the large debt. Secondly, lots of remittances. There were lots of people who worked like as Gastarbeiter in Germany and Austria, and they sent some of their money back during the 70s and 80s. Growth was happening until 80s. Something that is important to note here are two things. Firstly, that it was not self-sustainable, given that exponentially other economical factors grow, such as debt and trade deficit, which means that eventually, like basically, in mid 80s, Yugoslavia was really near bankruptcy. IMF just pardoned them really lot of money. Secondly, growth was much smaller than other countries that had similar level of, if we take into account things like GDP per capita at the beginning. So after World War II, Yugoslavia had similar GDP per capita as people from Germany or Spain, but however, all those countries just surpassed Yugoslavia really by a mile. It's like, it is true that there are lots of funds from, for example, Marshall Plan going to the Western Europe, but even more funds went to Yugoslavia in order to just try to keep them not under Russian influence, and since they were non-aligned. Even if you compare Yugoslavia to some countries that were under Iron Curtain, like Hungary or Bulgaria, the growth was similar in Yugoslavia as in those countries, which means that basically that economy was not self-sustainable. After Tito's death, basically, I think it was the death of Yugoslavia as well. Firstly, that was 80s when economic problems started to occur, and then people just weren't happy with that. Secondly, the problem was lack of political representation. Now, when you had the colorful personality of that one specific person that was able to maintain those things, that was really respected abroad, and generally when people were brainwashed, they were something that's really like lifelong president, really important, post Nazis, really good guy. When he died, it was highly problematic to maintain the country and to give equal political representation of the other countries. Republics within Yugoslavia wanted. What was the impact of those things? Two things. One was economical problems. The other one was political lack of representation and lack of that cult of personality. Was that nationalism was coming back. So from this point, I'm not going to go chronologically anymore. I mean, I am, but not only chronologically, but rather I'm going to try to analyze one country by another and see how chronologically those countries evolve. And I think it's much easier to follow like something like that rather than just go simply by chronologically and mention every single thing that happened. So let's go country by country. So first country that seceded from Yugoslavia was Slovenia. Now, there are some things that are important and specific about Slovenia and why they were able to really successfully secede without much of a hassle. Firstly, economically, Slovenia was by far most advantageous country, republic in Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia had 6 republics. Those were Serbia, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Slovenia, Macedonia, Montenegro. Also, there were 2 autonomous provinces within Serbia. One of them was Kosovo, the other was Vojvodina, in the north of Serbia. Now, Slovenia was the most most economically advantageous republic, just part of the country. Secondly, they were ethnically homogeneous. Most of the municipalities in Slovenia were pure, like 90% Slovenes, etc. What it meant is when they asked for more, representation and less centralization in Yugoslavia, and they were not granted that, mostly by some of the Serbian allies. Not to go into some details that are not important. They declared independence in 1991. That independence was followed by so-called 10-day war. As you can imagine, something that's called 10-day war was not very bloody. There were not many casualties. Mostly the reason for that are twofold. One is that they were ethnically homogeneous, and generally there were not lots of Serbian or any other minorities living there. Secondly, there were some other countries that were more important in terms of having battles there. Now, what is important in wars in 90s, and we're talking about 1991 right now, is that most of the wars, it was Serbia against some of the other countries. As I mentioned before, Serbs were there was the biggest number of Serbs living in Yugoslavia compared to all other nations, and therefore there were lots of Serbian minorities in some other countries. And generally, when other countries wanted to secede, the Serbian government, Yugoslav government, generally wanted to fight that back. So for that reason, it was the case that Slovenia was not really interested in terms of fighting back. After 1991, 10-day war ended with the Accord. Basically, nothing really problematic happened there. Nowadays, Slovenia is a member of both European Union and NATO. It's pretty successful. I don't think there are some of the things that might be either not necessarily interesting about Slovenia, but in terms of debate, interesting about Slovenia. So that's why I'm not going to spend much more time about that. So the other country, as I mentioned before, like at the same time as when Slovenia declared independence, the other country that declared independence was Croatia. So basically, before 90s and at the beginning of 90s, there were lots of Ustaša symbols that started to appear back again in Croatia. So there are certain symbols, and I'm going to go specifically into what those symbols are. But generally, what was the fact that Serbian minority, there were lots of Serbs living in Croatia, that they were really afraid seeing those symbols because they were afraid of something akin to World War II scenario. Because, if you know that your grandparents were killed or like almost killed in genocide, and if you know that members of the regime that used to kill them use certain symbols that are used right now, you usually just afraid. What happened because of that is the Serbian minority had help from Belgrade, which at this point is important to note that a lot of military equipment was basically seized by Serbs. Like Yugoslav army usually was mostly run by Serbs. So basically, there was some asymmetry of power between Serbia and Croatia, between Yugoslavia and Croatia, mostly Serbia and Montenegro from one side and Croatia from the other side, which meant this was one thing. Secondly, because Serbian minority was afraid in Croatia due to those symbols appearing again, and things like football match between Croatian and Belgrade football team, when you have basically incidents at the stadium, when you have those symbols portrayed right there, Serbian minority started blocking high roads, screwing up the tourist season in Croatia, which is really important for their economy, and this is something that just basically they wanted to secede from Croatia later on. So that's one of the things that happened. Basically, they were explicitly said. So if Croatia has a right to self-determination, that Serbs in Croatia have that right for self-determination as well. So for those reasons, what happened later on, because they had help from Belgrade, they felt that they were, like in terms of military, more powerful in Croatia. Serbian minorities in some parts of Croatia declared an independent state that was called basically, it was just part of the Croatia that they declared independence from. After that, there was a war that happened in Croatia. There were lots of really horrible things happening there. One of them was like seizure of Vukovar, one country that is near nowadays Serbo-Croatian border. Lots of people were killed there. The other one was just bombing Dubrovnik. You probably know the city. It's really famous by people. People all around the world go there. Even I think some Game of Thrones like scenes were filmed there. So basically, Montenegro and Serbia together like attacked like even Dubrovnik and some other cities. There were lots of fighting in Croatia happened. I'm not going to go into those details. I don't think that they are necessarily very important for debate. If you want to know more, I think BBC has excellent documentaries. There's 6P documentary about breakup of Yugoslavia, where you have like lots of those battles and specific details explained. But I'm here going to just emphasize things that you can use rather in a debate. So like that war is really deadly. It lasted for a couple of years. During those years, Croatia was able to get help from the West and to generally gain more empathy from the West. With the help of NATO, they were able to win the war over Serbs. War in Croatia ended with a couple of operations. The biggest one was Operation Storm, or in Serbo-Croatian, it's called Oluja. Now, why is this specifically important? Since it was the end of the war in Croatia, lots of Serbs afraid of repercussion from Croats left their homes. So you can find lots of pictures of people literally walking from Croatia towards Serbia as refugees because they were afraid. There are some estimated that around 250,000 Serbs fled when that operation happened. So what does that mean? That is one operation that basically won the war of independence for Croatia, but on the other hand, created lots of refugees and basically is ethnic cleansing of lots of people who used to live somewhere there. So, as you can see, again, there is ambiguity in how to perceive that specific event. Like in Serbia, it is perceived as a mass war crime. It is only perceived as ethnic cleansing, and basically as Croatian people coming there and making people who are just like all women, children, and everything leave their homes, from Croatia, and basically making ethnic cleansing. On the other hand, from Croatia, there is more dominant narrative. It was like simply a liberation. Right now, this is a national holiday in Croatia. And basically, that side of aspect is emphasized even more. So then again, something that is really important, specifically for like Croatian national identity, basically their national holiday, is the interpretation of that event is disputed to high extent from two countries that were in war with each other, which means the reconciliation long term in terms of really accepting what happened in history is really, really hard. It's another issue. There are many of those issues, but where those things are disputed. What's also important is lots of those people who left their homes were unable to return. Usually there are some administrative hassles why they cannot return, why they cannot gain back their property, etc., etc. So basically, then again, we have that clash of the narratives. This is how war in Croatia basically ended. So let's see what is happening in Croatia right now. So after the end of the war in Croatia, so yeah, one more thing about war. So basically, like when I was thinking of, so I said I made a presentation. I'm going to publish it later. But how to name that slide was really difficult because in Serbia usually it is seen as a civil war because it was one country, Yugoslavia, and one part wanted to see, and therefore civil war. In Croatia, it is seen as war for liberation. Basically, yeah. So basically, it would be something like Croatian War of Independence, right? So now, why this matters? Because, for example, there were some pushes from right-wing politicians in Croatia a couple of years ago to criminalize, claiming that Croatian War for Independence was civil war. So basically, the chilling effect of certain, literally created chilling effect in terms of that you want to forbid something, saying that something was like something different just because it is so important for creating of your national identity. This is something that that is worth mentioning. So basically, even in terms of how you name it, it is different because whether it's civil war or Croatian war for independence. So basically, those narratives are completely different in Serbia and in Croatia. I think it's really important to emphasize. What's happening right now in Croatia? So as you probably know, they are members, again, both of the European Union and NATO. They have a couple of issues that are both outlining. One of them is nationalism. Secondly is generally corruption, lack of rule of law, and like political scandals. Thirdly, economic problems that are happening there. So So firstly, regarding politics and economy. So something important about politics in Croatia. So you have a couple of like political parties. The two biggest are HDZ, which means Croatian Democratic Union, and SDP, which means Social Democratic Party. There are also some others that are important, but something is crucially important that both of those parties are leaned to the right in terms of perception of war of independence, etc. So war of independence in Croatia kind of has a totemic value in terms of something that is seen as basically really important thing in nation building. And as you imagine, as I mentioned, like even the Kingdom of Serbia in Croatia, later on Kingdom of Yugoslavia, and then Socialist Federative Republic of Yugoslavia, they were like there were movements who wanted to give more independence to Croatia. So basically, after all those years, getting the independent state is recognized by the world, and just Nazi puppet state is something seen as important. So basically, all those countries are moving to the right in terms of those issues, Operation Storm, etc., etc. Second thing is more important to know, there are structural reasons for that, not only because it is important for nation building, but also in terms of voters. There are lots of voters who don't live in Croatia but still are able to vote, basically the diaspora. Most of them live in, for example, Bothnia and Herzegovina. They have Croatian passports, they are able to vote there. Most of them vote for Croatian Democratic Union, which is more right-wing for those parties. And generally, those people are really important electoral body in terms of at the elections, diaspora. So I think that is a second structural reason why generally political discourse in Croatia is more moving to the right. Second thing, there are lots of scandals happening in terms of corruption. One of the ex-prime ministers is right now prosecuted against over some allegations of corruption. Generally, there are problems regarding that. Secondly, problems regarding nationalism. So some of those things are already outlined in terms of different interpretation of history, and basically it is really hard. And if you say that if you are like living in Croatia and like Croat, claiming that Jasenovac was the place when lots of people were killed, a place where genocide was committed, and something that was systematically done, you are more likely to be sad that you are just basically some people say to them that they are Chetniks. Those were Serbian royalists that also collaborated with Nazis, basically because they see that this is something that shouldn't, like, if those are issues that are really sensitive, and basically there is really lots of pressure on people over those like issues like Yasenova, like Operation Storm, etc. There are some other things that are interesting. One of them, there was a scandal regarding Croatian prime minister giving chocolate to some kids in Dubrovnik, and then some parents just posted the photo on Facebook and look, those are Serbian chocolates in Dubrovnik. It was attacked by Serbian forces. This is something that just after that everyone just was apologetic about it. There was a whole discourse whether Serbian chocolate should be served to Croatian children in city of Dubrovnik, which is weird. Just chocolate. It tastes the same probably. Anyway, those things are really, really important because generally it's really, really easy to play in that card. Usually with the card, what did you do in 1995 and whether you were fighting for independence or not. Also, veterans are really influential in Croatia. Generally, they were able just to have tents in the center of Zagreb and to threaten just to block it in just because they asked for more rights. That happened, I think, for 15 months. It was, I think, last year that they were dismantled. I'm not sure about your specifically, but it was important that veterans, or like in Croatian, domobrani, people who fought in that war for independence, are really influential, and people care about them, and usually they just have power simply because that war has a specific value in terms of how national identity was created. Second thing, which is problematic, is how they treat minorities, mostly Serbian minority. So firstly, I already mentioned refugees, it's really hard for them to come back to Croatia because of certain administrative hassles. But secondly, there are some issues with Serbian minority living in the city of Vukovar. So I already mentioned the city of Vukovar was seized and attacked by Serbian forces. There were lots of people living there. Nowadays, in Vukovar, we have, I think, over 30% of Serbian population living there, which under Croatian constitution can give you the right to have your own language. Now, I already mentioned that Serbian and Croatian languages are basically the same. And even right now, there are some linguists that have basically a statement that all those four languages, that means Serbian, Croatian, Bosnian, and Montenegrin, are same. Literally the same language. So there are some linguists, like scholars, who claim that those languages are same. Nevertheless, one of the differences, like one of the obvious differences, is that Serbs use Cyrillic alphabet, while Croats use Latin alphabet only. Now, what was the issue is, after that, there was a petition that all like public buildings in Vukovar should have Cyrillic plates next to Latin plates. So plates in Serbia, let's say, next to plates next to Croatian. There was a huge backlash against that. Literally, there is a ministry of there is a building of Ministry of Police that was just destroyed. No, not the building, but plates on that ministry that were destroyed in Vukovar by people because they were so angry. Despite the fact that Croatian Constitutional Court said this against constitution. After that, Vukovar forbid that those plates. Despite the fact that Constitutional Court said that they should have a right to do that in Croatia, despite the fact that the EU asked for Croatia to give that right to Serbian minority, still right now there are no those plates, as far as I'm informed. Now, why this example is important, how you can use them in the debate. So it's not just one interesting example, but rather I think it's really, really useful in terms of how you can explain the debate. I think generally symbols are something that are important for minorities in order not to feel threatened. And those basic symbols, like a language, even though that is just symbolic thing, like as I said, you understand the other language, not that you don't understand it, you need to have access to understand those places, but rather you just want to feel welcome by that country. Those things are sometimes the things that are most important for people, or at least something that the minimum what they ask. Also, those symbols, if they're linked to some form of oppression, they can be then used and seen as a really, really viral provocation from the other side. So either if you use the Cyrillic plates in Croatia, what people see as a provocation, given that lots of Serbian forces destroyed Vukovar, or either if you see the Croatian Ustaša symbols at the beginning of 90s, when Serbs were afraid because those symbols were linked to those mass killings, genocide, etc. I think that something you can use in debate later on is basically symbols are powerful tool in radicalizing people, or symbols are really, really powerful tool for minorities that if they don't have those basic access to like symbolic things like language, even though they understand literally every single word because languages are basically the same, like two dialects, even then some backlash can happen. I think that example is useful for that. Cool. Let's move on to some other countries. So let's go back in time. So in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Bosnia and Herzegovina is a specific country because it is the most heterogeneous country in terms of nationalities and religion living there. So right now, I think that there is around 50% of people who are Bosniaks. That means most of them are Muslims. There is around 30% people who are Serbs, and most of them are Orthodox Christians, and I think around 13% of Croats, most of them are Catholics. Those numbers change from census to census, which sometimes you don't have a really proper census, so they're not that much important, but like approximately those numbers match. Now, why this matters? Because given that heterogeneity of Bosnia, conflict there was the bloodiest. Around 100,000 people died in that conflict. There is dispute about everything regarding civil war in Bosnia. Even what event was the start of the war disputed. Obviously, Serbian side say that there is a event when Bosnians killed Serbian people started the war. The other side said the other thing. I'm not going to go into those details. I don't think they're important in terms of the debate. I think that, as you know, it was really, really bloody. There were some of the places, some of the massacres that were specific. One of them was siege of Sarajevo. Sarajevo is the capital of Bosnia. It is surrounded by really high hills. So lots of Serbian forces had, for a really long time, Serbian forces were positioned on those hills and were able to control Sarajevo and to shoot people from those hills, which is really terrifying. Also, another one is massacre in Srebrenica. I'm going to talk about it a little bit, like literally in a couple of minutes. The war in Bosnia ended with the help of NATO intervention and Dayton Agreement. And also, I'm going to explain that agreement a bit more in details. I think it's really important, both for debate and generally for understanding Bosnia. So firstly, let's talk about massacre in Srebrenica. So from 1993, sorry, Srebrenica was declared as UN protected zone, which was kind of supposed to be defended like no matter what, with any means and ends. So what was the problem? The problem was that the people who were there, like firstly, like some of those people, like UN envoys, wanted to leave the enclave. However, like literally, people allowed them to be there to help them to protect them against Serbs. That enclave was enclave for kind of safe zone for Muslims, Bosniak Muslims, who gathered them from other parts. That enclave rose in terms of a number of people who were captured there. Problem was because Serbs were controlling territories around, they were able to cut supply of food, of many things. Obviously, the excuse for that was basically, look, they're smuggling military equipment. We are cutting supply of that. Probably to some extent that might be true, but obviously they are also cutting supply of food, water, and basic necessities. International community tried to do some of the things. Firstly, NATO tried to bomb the Bosnian Serbs around. However, they were afraid of repercussion on UN center in Bothnia, near Srebrenica. They were afraid the Serbs were going to attack that center and kill those people. Also, Srebrenica was defended by Dutch contingent of UN. They later on made a deal with Serbs to give them the right over Srebrenica, if just ensure that they're going to let those people go, etc. That deal was made. However, after that, like it was never really fully accepted. So what happened is that there was separation of women and children from one side and like men from other side. The definition of man is sort of vague. There are people who are 18 years old who are killed in Srebrenica, etc. Approximately from 6,000 to 8,000 people who were civilians died in Srebrenica massacres, were killed by Serbian forces. Those people were Bosnian Muslims. That event, like genocide in Srebrenica, is usually referred as the worst conflict in Europe after World War II. So now, this is a very important moment because, so like obviously, mostly there is like, let's say, consensus in most of the countries that Srebrenica was genocide. However, more than 50% people in Serbia claim that it wasn't a genocide, rather it was either to some small extent self-defense, but to a large extent that it was simply just some of the fake, basically, not genocide. So I think it's really important to just explain right now what is so specific about genocide, why people deny genocide, and how the denial of genocide function. I think in lots of debates, people simplify how exactly genocide is, sorry, how genocide is denied. So one thing about genocide is intent to exterminate is crucial. So it's not only important to show that there were many people who died there. Usually it's the easiest part to just have many people who died, their names, bones, and just not the problematic. But the intent from one side to systematically destroy the other side is something that is crucial to prove genocide. That is something that is usually disputed by all nations that deny some sort of genocide. So basically, even if the Turkey denies genocide outside of Armenia, they don't say there were no Armenians killed, but I say it was not systematic destroying those people. There was no intent to exterminate them from certain part of land or part of those population or just whatever, but rather say, look, those are like single events that happened just because there was war happening. The same thing is happening basically in Serbia. I think there are many ways how people deny genocide. One way is obviously conspiracy theories and saying, look, where are the chimneys? It's all lies. It's all, I don't know, Jewish conspiracy or something like that. I think that those people are minority. I don't think that those people are relevant in terms of denying genocide. Definitely, if you take example of Srebrenica and Serbia, those people are not 50% of people who think just everything is fake. But what are the other things that people deny? One of them is number of people or civilians killed there. So either if you take example of Srebrenica or Jasenovac, there is usually ambiguity of how many people died at that specific place. So firstly, there is usually incentive for one side to exaggerate numbers to gain higher war reparations. That's, for example, what happened with Jasenovac in Yugoslavia. Usually, I think the figures by the file was 700,000 people, which was much higher than actual number of civilians killed in that concentration camp. The reason for that is because usually you want to just boost the numbers in order to ensure higher war reparations. And I'm not saying that this is being done in every single situation, but I think it's purely something that might be disputed. Even right now, if you Google some of the things, like there is a website that is not really good website. It's something like, I don't know, worldwithoutgenocide.com or something like that. They have article obviously on Srebrenica genocide. The first time that they said is that in Srebrenica genocide, 100,000 people died. The total number of people that died in Bosnian conflict is really hard to imagine that everyone was just killed in one small enclave, like just complete rubbish. So usually just sometimes like challenging the number is something that like sometimes makes sense, sometimes doesn't make sense. However, for the definition of genocide, the number is not necessarily really important. Whether it's 8,000 or 100,000, still it can be genocide. It's something that people don't necessarily understand, therefore there is denial of that. Secondly, there is denial of intent to actually exterminate certain population or part of the population. Usually people say, look, they didn't do this for that, they did it in self-defense, or those just were sporadic acts of violence or something like that. So I think it's something is important because in a debate, if you're debating about things like denial of genocide, obviously every single genocide is different. And you can't claim that genocide is in Rwanda, Armenia, Bosnia, were all the same. But however, if you want to debate about genocide, it's important to understand how people actually deny it. Why people deny genocide? I think firstly, it is really hard to accept guilt to that extent. So genocide is usually seen as the worst crime ever that can ever happen to people. Generally, it is linked to Nazism and to Holocaust. And usually people say, look, it wasn't like that. This is not something that I want that my national identity is linked to something that is so horrible. Usually people are able to say, look, there are some of crimes like happening there, but they are not ready to accept that those crimes happen to that larger extent. Obviously, it's not excuse to anyone, just the explanation of why people deny genocide. So if you want to debate to analyze how people would change their opinion or not, it is important to know why they believe something in the first place. Second thing is, because genocide is perceived as the worst, it's kind of crowd out all the other or major other atrocities. So usually there are lots of people who were both Croats, Serbs that were killed in, for example, Bosnia and Herzegovina. However, Srebrenica is probably something that is the basically common knowledge because it is genocide. And basically, lots of people saying, yes, fine, some people killed genocide in Srebrenica. I don't care. What about Serbs being killed in their place and some Serbs are being killed in? Everything is just not fair and biased and some sort of things. Thirdly, because usually like people who commit genocide, like high-ranking like generals, etc., are really seen as heroes of nations. It is really hard to link, and as I said, genocide should be systematic intent to destroy or destroying a certain nation, religious group. There are many sorts of groups that can destroy. It is really hard that if you perceive someone as a hero, as basically someone who protected you from the enemy, the totem, doing something that is the worst thing that can happen in that specific country. I think that those are mostly the reasons why people deny genocide. And if you want to analyze in some debate why less or more denial of genocide is going to occur, I think that analyzing those reasons and how exactly they're going to change or not change, to which side change, is something that is important. Obviously, to say how denial of genocide hurt people, I think something that's more intuitive to people. Generally, some of the countries, Bosnia included, usually builds some or even more of or even lots of their identity on those big sufferings. One of them might be genocide. And usually, if someone just undermines something that is like crux of your identity of your country, this is something that makes reconciliation much harder. The aftermath of Srebrenica genocide was basically like in terms of problem solving in Bosnia. It was like with the help of NATO. There was Dayton Agreement. Dayton Agreement. So it is someplace in America where basically the high-ranking officials from Serbia, Croatia, Bosnia, and representatives from Bosnian Serbs, Croats, and Bosniaks, obviously, met there. It was like there were lots of things written in Dayton. I think there are 200 pages of Dayton Agreement. You can find them online. I didn't read it. I think that's the most important thing. You don't really need to read every single thing, but what is written in Dayton. So obviously, one thing is like there should be peace in Bosnia. There are a couple of specific things that were created there. One is creation of two entities in Bosnia and Herzegovina. One of them being a Republika Srpska, or Republic of Srpska, I'm not sure which is more used in English. The second was Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina. The former, Republika Srpska, is mostly inhabited by Bosnian Serbs. The latter is mostly inhabited by Bosniaks, which means Bosnian Muslims, and Bosnian Croats. Then again, obviously, there are some places that are they don't just play by this rule, but mostly it is ethnically divided. Bosnia was more heterogeneous, obviously, before war, but however, lots of places were also people were ethnically displaced from some places, and therefore, right now it is more separated. And furthermore, all constitution of Bosnia and Herzegovina, with some specific details, was also created in Dayton Agreement. I'm going to talk about that constitution in a minute. However, the Dayton Agreement gave some of the autonomy to Bosnian Serbs. Usually, there is a perception that among non-Serbs living in Bosnia, that Republika Srpska, the Serbian entity in Bosnia and Herzegovina, is entity that was made because or out of genocide. This is obviously something that Serbs in majority don't agree with. And this is something that just makes reconciliation in that specific country and generally in the region much, much harder. Just to recapitulate the conflict in Bosnia, it's really complex. There were lots of times that one time Serbs were against Bosnian and Croats together, sometimes Bosnians were against Croats, everyone was against everyone at some point. There were lots of atrocities, from rapes to murders to really horrific things. It ended with Dayton Agreement. There was massacre in Srebrenica, genocide in Srebrenica, which is also important in debate. It can be used in terms of how people interact when members of their nation commit genocide or when genocide is committed against their nation. Obviously, there are some other examples, but I think Yugoslavia is also a useful one. Cool. Let's see what are issues right now in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I think that, so I just separated this in three issues. One of them is nationalism. Second is ineffective institutions. And third is a lack of identity in terms of umbrella identity for all three constitutional people living right there. So let's firstly talk about nationalism, specifically in terms of politics in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So most of the parties in Bosnia and Herzegovina that are most powerful are nationalist parties. So are parties for like only for Serbs, for Croats, for Bosniaks, for Muslims. Generally, any politician that claims that maybe you should have more centralization of Bosnia in terms of less separation and along ethnic lines is usually not really popular by people. Also, as you can imagine, there are some other nations living under like in Bosnia and Herzegovina that are not Croats, Serbs, and Bosniaks. There is one specific case that is interesting. That is Sejdić-Finci case. That is case that I think it was it was one Roma and one Jewish person suing Bosnia because under the constitution of Bosnia and Herzegovina, they basically cannot become presidents. And what does it mean? Bosnia and Herzegovina has 3 presidents, and the chair of the presidency is just rotating every some time. Now, every president should be like one president should be Bosnian Serb, one Bosnian Croat, the third should be Bosniak or Bosnian Muslim. That means that if you're Roma, if you're Jewish, if you're like Yugoslav or Montenegrin or whatever, you can't be president. Also, you can't get into one of 2 chambers of Bosnian parliament, which means there is some sort of systematic discrimination against those people. Those things, that like presidency, like 3 presidents for one country, everything was created in Dayton. So what I think the European Court, European courts, what they said about this case is not constitutional. That it is some sort of discrimination that should not be tolerated. That even if we take into account the specific situation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, that still that rule about presidency should be changed. However, as you imagine, it's really hard to change constitution, specifically for some of those issues, specifically because changing constitution might trigger some other changes, as for example, the status of Bosnian Serbs in Bosnia and Herzegovina that usually have like secessionist tendencies and want to secede. I'm going to talk about this a little bit after. Another issue about politics of Bosnia and Herzegovina like other than mostly parties are nationalist parties and just like those three biggest nations there, generally there is huge apathy and dissatisfaction by people with politics. In Bosnia, around 20% of people live below poverty line. Despite that, Bosnian politicians are the highest paid politicians in Europe. This is not something that people like generally. There was one event that is interesting in noting. That was in 2014. There were some, it might be a Bosnian Spring or something like that. There were lots of protests across Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, mostly by Bosniaks, by Bosnian Muslims, because they were not satisfied with how basically the country is run. The trigger for that basically was some sort of bad privatization that happened in Tuzla, in one of the countries in Bosnia, and some of the people just lost their jobs, etc. And given that there were lots of those bad privatizations that happened across Yugoslavia, and we'll talk about this a bit later, but given that there were lots of people who were just triggered by that and meant that they wanted to protest. Those protests lasted for some time. There was some impact in terms of some of the, I think they are called prime ministers, because like they also have like 13 prime ministers for every like part, like sub-part of the federation, but doesn't matter. Some of them just resigned because of those protests, but still the same parties are there in the parliament, and nothing structurally changed, even though that like those protests had some impact in terms of some specific people are not anymore on those specific positions in power. However, structural problems and bad politics still remain. Second problem I outlined was institutions in Bosnia and Herzegovina are like not very good. Firstly, there is generally a lack in institutions due to high corruption and generally ineffectiveness of that. Secondly, lots of across Bosnia there are lots of parallel institutions. So I think it's one like really vivid example might be the city of Mostar. That is a city that is divided by so obviously there are every nation living there, but mostly Bosnian Muslims and Bosnian Croats. The thing about that city is that if you go, for example, in school that is run by Bosnian Croats, you learn certain time of history curricula, you learn Croatian language, you learn everything like differently than if you're going to school run by Bosniaks, i.e. by Bosnian Muslims. I think that those issues make segregation of people going much further in terms of going to the next generations. It means that like if that segregation is basically institutionalized, that means that, for example, education system literally separates you. If you're Serbian, you're going to one school. If you're Croat, to another, etc. Obviously, there is no clear separation. You're not banned from going to one to another school, but generally, parents don't want to send their kids to the school of other nations, specifically mostly because of history curricula, but also because of language, even though the language, as I said, basically the same. Those things make segregation and animosity and generally lack of interaction within those nations much harder. So there are lots of parallel institutions happening right there. Also, decision-making process is really slow. Firstly, because of nationalism, usually cooperation is not something that is seen as a good thing. That's why we had, I think, 450 days was the longest period when Bosnia didn't have any form of government. In the city of Mostar, as I mentioned before, there were no elections since 2007. So basically 10 years without elections. And the people who were elected back then are still in power. The reason for that is because of certain way how the municipality is split among Croats and Bosniaks is something that make politicians unlikely to accept that divisions, and basically the status quo remains. That's why I think the decision-making process, elections and everything is really slow. Secondly, some high institutions like Constitutional Court generally lack representation. The Constitutional Court of Bosnia has 9 members. 4 of them are from Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, so 2 Croats, 2 Bosniaks, then again probably no Roma, Jews and others. Yeah, those others are literally named in constitution by the others with capital O. So it's not that I'm using the term, but rather it's really constitutional discrimination. There are 2 members of Constitutional Court that are from Republika Srpska, that are Serbs. There are 3 people who should not be from Bosnia and not be from any country surrounding Bosnia, no from Serbia or from Croatia. Right now, there is 1 person from Slovakia, etc. Now, what does it mean? Usually, some of the decisions in Constitutional Court are just given to people of Bosnia and Herzegovina from institution that literally has 1/3 of their members not being citizens of that country. As you can imagine, people generally don't respect those things. There are 2 examples of that constitutional court something is not constitutional, but nevertheless, just people didn't care. One was National Day of Republic of Srpska. So basically, it's somewhere in January, I don't remember really. But nevertheless, it's something is National Day. The leader of Bosniaks just sued, said it's not constitutional. They had a case at the Constitutional Court. They said it's against constitution, but still, like people in Republic of Srpska don't care about it. They run referendum whether there should be National Day of Republic of Srpska. They want it, and they simply ignore Constitutional Court. Second might be that coat of arms of Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina is also not constitutional because there are no any symbols of Serbs on that court. Simply, there is completely ignoring of that verdict as well. So basically, if you see that you have a country that is run by big politicians, slow decision-making process, nationalist parties that are unlikely to collaborate because of many reasons, they have parallel institutions that just entrench those discriminations, and they have high like authority institutions that are not respected by people. That means that usually that country is not very respected by their citizens. Which is my third thing, that is lack of Bosnian identity. So there is one thing, I hope that sounds pretty good, because one letter that makes distinction between Bosnian and Bosniak. So Bosniak is usually a Muslim person who just identify as Bosniak, but Bosnia might be anyone living in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So just the one letter, but the one identity is just more exclusive than the other. So what does it mean? There is lack of feeling of any Bosnian identity. This means generally people who are Bosniaks, Muslims in Bosnia and Herzegovina, feel that Bosnia is their true homeland. But most of the Serbs and Croats don't really connect themselves that much to Bosnia and Herzegovina. Firstly, lots of Serbs have secessionist tendencies in the Republic of Srpska. They want to secede, even though there are no like direct like scheduled referenda on secession. Still, there are sometimes threats. There are lots of people who generally claim that they would generally want either to secede or just to be part of Serbia. Secondly, most people who are Croats are dissatisfied because they don't have the autonomy the same as Serbs have. But also, most of them have Croatian citizenship. As I already mentioned, most of them also influence elections in Croatia. When I mentioned that diaspora is voting for Croatia and voting more right-wing than generally people in Croatia. Also, so the thing is, firstly, generally, lots of people don't really feel that that country is their home. If you travel to Bosnia, if you travel to places where mostly Serbs live, you see Serbian flags, Serbian coat of arms. If you're traveling to places where more Croats live, you see Croats like symbols, etc. Symbols in Bosnia and Herzegovina, like from that country, are usually kind of stir up. You know, like national anthem doesn't have any words. Reason for that is because they couldn't just make a deal what words should they put in the national anthem, because you know, just you can't disagree just with the melody, but you can disagree with words. So basically, it's something that is just a song without any words, so they don't sing it. Also, one I think example, again in Mostar, where lots of Croats and Bosnian Muslims, is when there was a football match between Croatia and Turkey. So there are two countries, none of them is Bosnia. Most of the Croats obviously rooted for Croatia. Most of the Bosnian Muslims generally feel a good connection with Turkey. Turkey invests lots there, either in terms of investment or in terms of like projects to develop schools, etc. Also, some other Gulf countries like Qatar build I don't know, their library, etc. But this is not the point I want to make. But however, there are two countries, none of them in Bosnia, playing against each other. We have city in Bosnia and Herzegovina that is completely destroyed because supporters of those two countries that are actually citizens of Bosnia and Herzegovina are having fight against each other, burning things in the city, generally rioting, etc. I think it's something that is highly problematic. It means that generally people are less likely to accept institutions and to try to build them if they don't feel that this is their country. I think it's something that makes Bosnia and Herzegovina in the future generally unlikely to be more successful country, unfortunately. Which is my opinion, but those are the reasons why I use for them. So how to use that in debate, and why I'm just putting lots of emphasis on Bosnia and Herzegovina, is that generally, so like power sharing is fine in terms of stopping war. However, the more power sharing that you can have more dysfunctional states in the future, leads to worse things. If we compare that to Croatia, still there is some nationalism in Croatia or in Serbia. I'm going to talk about Serbia later. Don't worry. Still, there is some nationalism, but there are parties that don't talk only about nationalist issues, and they are popular. Other things are more important in those countries. But however, in those countries, nationalism is something that is much more important, and also generally decision-making process, participation in politics, all those things are something that are much less likely to occur. So, like power sharing is something that, at least like Bosnian example of power sharing is something that just, I think doesn't work very well. Then again, this is the question: what would be the alternative? Whether it would be like completely secede country and just have countries along ethnic lines. The problem with that might be because those two entities, after those two entities, Republic of Srpska and Federation were created, there were another part, it's called District of Brčko, really small part, like one city basically, that is just not part of any of those two countries. What is important here is that basically if you would just secede, for example, Republic of Srpska from the rest of Bosnia, basically that country wouldn't be really connected. You would have basically discontinuity between those two countries. That might work in some other countries that are fine with each other, but with countries that, but when you had war and people have huge animosity towards each other, probably it wouldn't work. The second problem are because probably they're mixed cities still. One example might be Srebrenica, a really good example, because Srebrenica is in the Republic of Srpska. So if we just said, okay, look, they just divide Bosnia by the 0 to 1, it means it's Srebrenica, the place where around from 6,000 to 8,000 Bosnian Muslims were slaughtered, were killed in genocide. Is going to be part of Serbia or a Republic of Srpska. It's probably going to be problematic in terms of people accepting that, and then again some other problem happening. So then again, the thing is, what would be the alternative? And I think that probably the alternative wouldn't be really much better. So it is the question whether this status quo, how it's going to work. Okay, so those are the things concerning conflicts in Bosnia and Croatia, and to some extent Slovenia. 10-day war is nothing compared to those wars in Bosnia and Croatia. There is another part of Yugoslavia that also had lots of conflict, mostly Kosovo and Macedonia. We're going to move to that right now. Now, one thing that is important for context. Conflicts on Kosovo and Macedonia. So first I'm going to talk about Kosovo, then about Macedonia. Kosovo, there's some things that are specific about Kosovo that are important to understand. Firstly, there is a huge battle that happened in Kosovo in 1389, in 14th century. There is a huge national myth that is created in Serbia that Serbs, despite the fact that they lost that battle from Turks, it was basically Serbs versus Turks. Despite the fact that they lost their battle, they stopped and decreased spread of Islam to Europe. That means that they see that basically that even though there were lots of people died there, it's something that was really important in terms generally for Serbian national identity. Second thing that is important about Kosovo is specific. there is really like lots of churches and monasteries, Orthodox churches and monasteries there that are of special importance. Some of them are even other like UNESCO protected sites and things like that. Thirdly, Kosovo was by far poorest region of the country. Okay, so those are things that are specific about Kosovo that are important in order to understand the conflict there. Also, right now, like more than 90% of people on Kosovo are Albanians, and like they were majority, which like not really 94%, but still they were majority even before. Albanians are not Slavs. That means that their native language is not something is understandable by the other people. It's not like Serbs and Croats, they understand each other and interact much more, but rather they have the languages completely different. And I think that generally the lack of communication happened because of that. Obviously, like a lot of them like learn Serbo-Croatian, but it's much different if your like language is completely different. If you speak, if you basically lots of those people were basically they speak only Albanian, etc. So I think that those things are important to contextualize how Kosovo exactly look like. So as I mentioned when I was talking about World War II, during World War II, Albania that was under occupation of Italy, the Great Albania also included Kosovo and parts of Macedonia and some parts of Montenegro. Now, after that, Kosovo was just part of Yugoslavia. In 1974, it was granted autonomous status. That means that it had some sort of autonomy for people on Kosovo. So then again, in 1980s, 1981, some separatist riots started there. They were not really big, but still distorted, usually due to economic instability, dissatisfaction of people. There are some riots. They were easily handled, but still they happened. Slobodan Milošević was a Serbian president during the 1990s. So he came to power in 1989. He removed autonomy from Kosovo. So just basically did something, even though the constitution just granted them autonomy, he just removed that. He fired lots of Albanians from public sector that are working in public sector, specifically in police. That means generally those people were afraid that basically they don't have their representatives in those important institutions. Thirdly, he had some really huge nationalist speech in 1989. So if you remember, I said that 1939 was a huge battle where there is a huge nationalist myth about Serbia protecting Europe from Islam. 1989 was 600 years anniversary. So on that anniversary, there were lots of people from all around Yugoslavia, mostly Serbs, coming there, listening to that nationalist speech. You can find it online. I'm not going to lose time with that, but if you find it interesting, it is online. That's the subtitle as well. It lasts around 10 minutes or something. So the consequences of that, of striking lots of Albanians from their rights and from their autonomy, were firstly huge strike of miners in 1990. Secondly, installation of certain parallel institutions in Kosovo. So basically, just with help mostly from Albania, they were able to just install some of parallel institutions in Kosovo that were not in any way linked to Serbia or Yugoslavia for that. 1992, they declared their independence, but still, it is not something that that was relevant in terms of nowadays independence of Kosovo. So from 1991 to 1995, there were wars in Bosnia and Croatia, and we were talking about it just before. During those things, Kosovo Albanians were afraid that of those bloody conflicts, repercussion from Serbs, etc. Most of the people supported Ibrahim Rugova, that is was a leader of Democratic League of Kosovo. Sometimes he is referred to as the Gandhi of the Balkans because he didn't want to like engage in conflicts with Serbia, but rather to try to peacefully change the question of Kosovo. That changed later on in terms of not in terms of his beliefs, but in terms of he cooperated later on with some of the members that were more for violence. 1995 was Dayton Agreement. I mentioned that in both. There was a big hope in Kosovo in terms of Albanians that Dayton will also tackle the question of Kosovo. However, given that like Bosnian genocide happened, that those things were much more deadly, no one really did anything about Kosovo in Dayton. After that, Rugova started to lose support in terms of people being for peaceful solution, but Kosovo Liberation Army, or KLA, or in Albanian UK, that used to be a terrorist organization on USA listed terrorist organization, later rebranded itself and gained much more support as someone for fighting for liberation from Serbian power. There were lots of clashes in 1998, 1999 from Serbian forces and Albanians. A lot of crimes happened on both sides, and it all like culminated in 1999 when NATO intervened in Yugoslavia. So at that point in 1999, most of the republics I already mentioned seceded. So Yugoslavia only consists of Serbia and Montenegro, Serbia with Kosovo and Montenegro. There was intervention from NATO. After that, Serbia agreed to withdraw its forces from Kosovo, and there was the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1244 that was deemed to just solve the problem of the Kosovo problem in terms of autonomy, in terms of how everything is going to be respected, etc. Nothing explicitly mentioned independence in terms of that was the goal. But however, as you can see, like it changed a little bit later on. After that, there were some clashes, not like huge war, huge killings. The biggest one was in 2004. There was a lot of ethnic clashes when Albanians attacked lots of places in Serbs live, in some places of worship, like churches, graveyards, monasteries, things like that. And lots of people left, and like Serbs left their home. And right now, Serbs are living in north part of the territory, and in some enclaves in Central Russia, basically just a village with just really this completely disconnected from other places where Serbs live. Now, why? Yeah, cool. So after that, Kosovo declared independence. And basically, probably you heard about that. Lots of countries didn't recognize Kosovo as an independent country, Serbia including. Most of the reasons for that are, firstly, because, as I mentioned before, there are some reasons why for Serbian national identity, Kosovo is specifically important. Secondly, if you understand all those, like Yugoslavia losing lots of territory, there is lots of perception that actually Serbs lost a lot of their territory, because a lot of people left Croatia, like Serbian Krajina, and things like that. I think for those reasons, there is a huge, let's say, aversion towards losing more territory that exists generally if you ask like average person in Serbia. Now, what does that mean in practice? Does it mean that right now Kosovo cannot access lots of international organizations? Not only because Serbia doesn't recognize it, but generally because Russia and China, two members of Security Council, don't recognize Kosovo as well. Russia, because generally they are sort of allied with Serbia, at least in terms of they support Serbia in terms of Kosovo, because they don't want to grant independence. China, because generally, for some reason, they care about sovereignty a lot. I'm not going to go into those details, but however, since those two countries that are members of Security Council don't accept Kosovo, it's really hard for them to gain lots of access. In terms of the European Union, most of the countries do accept Kosovo. Some countries that don't are usually countries that themselves have some secessionist parts. One of them is Spain. The other one is Slovakia. I think there are a couple of them more. Greece, I think. Doesn't matter. The thing is that because of that, even though the Kosovo would like to enter the European Union, probably it's very much harder given that some of the countries that are there don't support their independence. So issues in Kosovo, one of them is generally recognition, which countries recognize them, because without recognition it's much hard, like hard for them to do anything, either trade or just diplomatic relations or entering some international treaties and unions. Secondly, there is issue regarding full control of territory. So northern parts of Kosovo, as I mentioned already, are inhabited mostly by Serbs. So Kosovo is generally really ethnically separated. That means that there is really small places where there is some sort of mixed cities, places, whatever. Now, what it means? It means on the in the north of Kosovo, there are Serbian parallel institutions that people actually go to. There is Serbian schools, Serbian everything basically, and the thing is that no one respects Kosovo's institutions right there. On the contrary, like there are no Serbian institutions in south and mainland Kosovo, and basically just Albanian institutions are functioning there. The other problems in terms of changing that will be talks over normalization relations with Serbia. However, given that I explained to you why Kosovo is very important for Serbia, usually politicians are averse to recognize Kosovo anytime. None of the politicians that are relevant anytime would tell you that they are going to recognize Kosovo, which on the other side is something that Albanians don't want to accept. It's something that they explicitly said, I think, a week ago or something, that they are not in any way going to proceed with talks or normalizations relations with Serbia if Serbia doesn't recognize Kosovo. So that's one of the issues. Secondly, some of the members of KLA, of Kosovo Liberation Army, that I mentioned before, was fighting, are high-ranking officials in Kosovo. One of them is Ramush Haradinaj. This is the person that was indicted in International Criminal Court for Yugoslavia. So I think the whole workshop could be done on ICTY, but simply there is no time to talk about it here. But there is one thing that is important to mention here. There are lots of people who were supposed to witness against Ramush Haradinaj, but however were killed or died under suspicious circumstances, which means that generally, like he's now free. There were 2 trials against him, but still he's free. The problem with that is that generally reconciliation, I think in terms of Serbs living in Kosovo, accepting those institutions when you have high-ranking officials who are members of KLA, and there is perception that they are war criminals who just kill their witness in order to walk free, or from Serbia just to have some normalization. There were some issues of whether they should shake hands, things like that. Those are the issues in Serbian media, because generally it is seen as someone you're shaking hands with a war criminal. Given that, I think it makes reconciliation between Serbia and Kosovo much more difficult. I think it's problematic for Kosovo, it's problematic for Serbia as well. But generally, those are the issues that generally concern Kosovo. Okay, so there are other smaller issues that might be interesting. One of them is after more than 20 years, there was supposed to be direct train from Serbia to Mitrovica, that place in Kosovo. So it was supposed to run on sort of Orthodox New Year. There is such a thing, doesn't matter. Anyway, what Serbian authorities did was they painted a train in colors of Serbian flag. They put Kosovo and Serbia in 20-something languages. They put lots of elements from Orthodox churches inside the train. So despite the fact the train is really, camp and not really nice looking, it was seen as provocation. It was sent there. It was stopped at administrative line of Kosovo, and they just returned the train. And then from Kosovo side, you hear that there is a huge provocation, the direct provocation from Serbia. From Serbia, see, look, we wanted to have train going to connect those two places. We didn't let us do, etc. Politicians usually have incentives to do so because it's usually seen by people as something that you are showing that the other side is not really for the dialogue while you just protecting your national interests. So those are things regarding Kosovo. So I think it's like right now there are some like talks going on, but nothing crucial is like changing in terms of situation of recognition of Kosovo, in terms of cooperation of people who live in those two territories, etc. The other conflict that happened was in Macedonia. So it's going to be much more brief than the Kosovo example. So Macedonia was the only country that seceded from Socialist Federative Republic of Yugoslavia without war. So later Montenegro also seceded from something was called Serbia Montenegro, but like from that Socialist Federative Republic of Yugoslavia, the only country we have any war, like not even 10 days, was Macedonia. So there are lots of Albanians living in Macedonia. They didn't have a census since 2002, but there are like approximately from 25 to 30 or even 40% of Albanians living there. Also, generally, Albanians have higher birth rate than Macedonians on average, which means that generally it is high to evaluate what is the exact ethnic distribution of people living in Macedonia. In 2001, there was insurgency by Albanian extremists, NLA, that happened in Macedonia that lasted for some time. So firstly, it's like generally those people ask for more rights for Albanian minority. One of those rights was recognition of Albanian language as co-official language in municipalities where Albanians are a majority. Okay, so then again, those symbolic things are something, and later on it was accepted by Ohrid Agreement. But then again, those symbolic things are something that generally minorities are ready literally to die for in order to get those things. Secondly, there was some spillover effect from Kosovo conflict. There are lots of people who are members of Kosovo Liberation Army fighting in Macedonia as well. So, like generally, there was spillover effect from war Kosovo happened there. And this insurgency was not as bloody as those like wars in Kosovo, Bothnia, Croatia. But however, it then ended Ohrid Agreement with like support and guarantee from these from NATO. Couple of things happened that are worth outlining happened in Ohrid. One is that Albanian language became co-official language in municipalities where Albanians are majority or generally. Secondly, that Albanians should be more included in politics. And after 2002, generally in every single government, you had one Albanian party that was supporting the government, or being part of the government, basically, as the second party, as a coalition party. And usually it is, if you have, for example, let's say, Ministry of Education in Macedonia, and usually Deputy Minister of Education is Albanian, or vice versa. So usually you had some sort of more like different power sharing. Thirdly was disarmament of like NLA said that they were like abandon their arms. Fourthly, the Albanians said they were accept Macedonian institutions because during those riots there were lots of parallel institutions like being installed in Macedonia as well. So it's one, so this is something that happened in 2001. Regarding issues right now, so one of the issues are ethnic tensions between Macedonians and Albanians. The other are generally political instability and the problem of identity. So, so let's talk about firstly about identity. So generally, there is a name dispute with Greece because Greece generally perceived that Macedonia, like the northern part of Greece is called Macedonia, and some old country, if you remember Alexander the Great, was also called Macedonia. Greece see this as a provocation and as a threat for their national, threat for their sovereignty. Some of the things the Macedonians are doing is generally reclaiming the symbols of Macedonia as of that ancient Macedonia as Macedonia. So you have a huge like statue of Alexander the Great. Lots of things are named Alexander the Great, etc. Greece claims that they have basically the patent law on Macedonia. That's why Greece blocked Macedonia from entering in many important institutions. One of them is the European Union. the other one is NATO. The things that are changing right now, well, last week, the Prime Minister of Macedonia said that they are going to try to see how to resolve the identity problem in terms of Macedonia entering NATO until next year. So basically, usually Greece is allowing Macedonia to enter somewhere under the name of former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. So if you watched Eurovision and saw that long name, you probably heard it there. Generally, literally, Greece is blocking them from entering the EU and NATO right now. So probably Tsipras is going to be like likely to accept them entering NATO with that name. However, there is a right-wing small party, if I'm not wrong. They also need like their support in order to be able to enter. Like Greek National Party. We're going to see what's going to happen, but it's something that's worth looking up right now. So generally, not only about the name, but generally there is the problem regarding the identity in terms of Macedonia, because lots of countries that surround Macedonia don't, like, obviously not countries, but lots of people who live there don't perceive Macedonians as literally as a real nation. So generally there is perception that a lot of them were either Serbs or Bulgarians, they mixed each other, etc. If you remember Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, there is no mentioning of Macedonians right there. Given that, I think there is generally a problem of Macedonia establishing their own identity, given how other countries perceive them, like from their own name to the other things. Then again, we can see the importance of symbols, and this is, I promised the last time I mentioned that thing. But generally, that sometimes countries are able to be like blocked from institution and just remain like that, simply for not changing their name, because this is something that is so symbolically important for them, for the nation, and people don't want to vote for those issues. People are just, against that. So let's move further. The other thing is political instability in Macedonia. So there are a couple of parties that are important in Macedonia. One of them, I can tell you the name, but you're not going to be able to pronounce it. It's BBU Open. So they were in power for quite a long time, up until recently. The other one is SDSM, so it's similar like BDSM, just the one letter is different. The third one, so there are also some Albanian parties, as I mentioned before. Most of the governments, in all the governments after 2002, you had the Albanian party that was part of the coalition. And in 2015, there were wiretapping scandals in terms of dominant party, that is BBU one, just hacking lots of, like they would disclose that over 20,000 phone numbers were hacked, and some of things that were like found out were some allegations, corruption, even some murders were covered, etc. I'm not going to go into details. Generally, something it was a huge scandal in terms of like generally any democratic country. What happened that there were lots of protests across country, and that generally people were dissatisfied with that. The ruling party said that it was obviously a conspiracy, either from people that want to undermine Macedonian stability, etc., either from George Soros, which you can imagine in Eastern Europe is really important person in just fucking up society. Please, if you listen to autocrats, but generally those were those allegations. There were lots of protests literally for months happening in Macedonia. There were elections, if I remember correctly, in December 2016, where the other party, SDSM, won majority. And also, there were some, like before that, there were some ethnic tensions that happened. There was a huge raid against Albanians in Kumanovo, in one of the cities in Macedonia. So there are two, then again, as always in the fight, there are two interpretations of that event. The interpretation from BBU back then, the ruling party, is that they were basically plotting terrorist attacks. There were some both police officers and some Albanian nationals killed there. There is a trial happening right now, but which is closed from the public. Then again, the other interpretation from people from the opposition, from Albanians as well, is basically just a cover up to show that there is some sort of instability in order to just shift the focus from those scandals to the other things. What is true, really, I think it requires much more analysis. Generally, journalism in Macedonia is not really perfect, and for those reasons, we don't really necessarily know what exactly happened there. But also, it's something that can spark the ethnic tension. The other thing that can spark is after those elections. So basically, just up until recently, the president of Macedonia was just using his kind of symbolic power to grant someone right to form a government, simply because they wanted to appoint Speaker of the Parliament to be Albanian, to be Mr. Jafari. So basically, that will be the first time, and this is the first time that Albanian person is going to be Speaker of the Parliament. They were claiming that this is just a slippery slope to country becoming more Albanian, and therefore this is something that a lot of Macedonian nationalists just disagree with. What happened is it escalated with some protesters storming the parliament, entering there, hurting over 100 people, including 9 members of parliament, including right now Prime Minister Mr. Zaev. So basically, this is something that just happened I think a month ago or something like that in Macedonia. Those issues also something that can spark ethnic tensions, despite the fact that there is some sort of agreement, there is some sort of autonomy, and there were no major incidents in Macedonia in terms of ethnic incidents. Still, this is something that can spark those tensions. Generally, something that happens in Balkans, the politicians, when they are faced with some severe problems, or generally when someone questions their authority in terms of corruption, rule of law, opposition treating journalism, they always just go to the ethnic clashes, because ethnic clashes are something people are sick of, and generally just afraid or not having stability, things like that. Okay, so just briefly, so those are the countries that seceded. There is one more country that seceded from Yugoslavia that was later on named Serbia and Montenegro. That is Montenegro. So I just briefly got, simply for the sake of completeness, just to outline some of those issues. Right now they became member of NATO. You probably saw the video of Trump being a little bit aggressive, let's say, against the Montenegro Prime Minister. Generally, they have opposition that is mostly pro-Russian, and generally, historically, they were very close with Russians. Most of the time, they were run one way or another by Milo Đukanović. Firstly, he was pro-Serbian. He was cooperating with Serbians when they were there was war in Croatia, etc. Later on, and then he was for the state that was Serbia and Montenegro. Later on, he just wanted to have independence, etc. Most of his family members are one of the richest people in Montenegro. His brother is one of the biggest shareholder of the biggest bank in Macedonia in Montenegro. Sorry, they had some really weird privatization to the grid, etc. Which is interesting about him is the Italians charged him for money laundering and cigarette smuggling. He's using his diplomatic immunity for quite a long time to just evade those things. So Montenegro, in terms of debate, I don't think is really interesting country, so I'm not going to spend that much time. So lastly, it is Serbia. I'm going to talk about. So obviously, I talk about Serbia when I talk about any clashes, because usually there were Serbian forces there, and basically you would be able to grasp some of those issues. So I'm not going to repeat our 1990s war, because most of them Serbia was part of. However, during 1990s, something that I haven't said before is that there were beside lots of wars, like NATO intervention and everything. There was lots of there were sanctions against Serbia, mostly from the West. There was huge inflation during 1993, which was the peak of inflation. It was literally the money, if you get them Friday, spend them on Monday, just useless. Just really, really high inflation, something compared to the highest inflation in the world. Lots of elections were rigged by Milosevic. A lot of journalism was prosecuted, some of them even killed. Some of those killed journalists are even right now those murders are even right now not like solved completely. One thing that is worth noting is that nowadays President of Serbia Aleksandar Vučić was Minister of Journalism and Information in 1998 in Milosevic's government, when lots of repercussions against journalism happened. I'm going to talk about it a little bit later, but just generally, let's talk about Milosevic. In 2000, after like NATO intervention, generally dissatisfaction, Milosevic fell. There was like huge opposition that was able to clear them to win those elections. This was like democratic opposition of Serbia. This was basically everyone who was not pro Milosevic was united to form some sort of opposition. The issue in Serbia is that there is huge rural-urban divide in terms of people accessing information and in terms of people caring about things like nationalism, generally voting one way or another. As in many countries, it's not something that is like specifically different. Also, they were able to win. They rebranded themselves as "We're not Milosevic," and every single party and every single election afterwards were saying that no, we're just Milosevic. We don't want to go back to 1990s. For some time, it worked. However, given that the politicians that were active during Milosevic are still active right now, eventually they were able just to win the elections simply because people were dissatisfied with those new like opposition parties. They saw that they didn't change anything structurally, and they were only just claiming that they are not like Milosevic. They were not satisfied with that. Given that, I think that lots of people just either didn't vote or voted for those opposition parties simply because they wanted to punish those so-called democratic parties in Serbia. So there's one party that was extremely radical in terms of right-wing party. It's called Serbian Radical Party. It never had really much power until they like had a little bit of succession within their party. They split. They had like Serbian Radical Party. They have also a new one, rebranded SNS Party. Right now they are in power. They were able, despite the fact that lots of those people were very powerful either during Milosevic or even later, generally like part of right-wing nationalist party, they were able to rebrand themselves as a pro-European. This is something that is generally happening in the Balkans, and right now, specifically in Serbia, I know I could just explain that for like some time. Problem is generally, given that usually people perceive that they are losers from the last war, that they don't want to lose more territories. Generally, nationalism is something that is really powerful, and those people, if they perceive as they are nationalists, is something that just give them automatically some sort of vote. Second way how they are able to maintain those their power is they have lots of control of media. So there are some numbers, like some go in high, saying 90% of media coverage of Aleksandar Vučić at last election, presidential election. The 90% of media coverage on presidential election was for Aleksandar Vučić, who used to be prime minister, and now is president. And as I said, was minister of information during Milosevic's rule. Also, the opposition is weak because when they lost and they lost that agenda, we're not Milosevic anymore, we're not in 1990s, we don't have hyperinflation. Lots of those parties split up. There are lots of small parties. You don't have like the main opposition. You can say, look, this is the main opposition to that party. So you have lots of small parties. Sometimes they cooperate, sometimes they don't. But generally, right now, they're not able to beat them. What happened recently that might be interesting is, like, as you know, as I mentioned, Aleksandar Vučić was prime minister. Right now, he became president. That means that he needed to elect a new person that's going to give mandate to a new person to be able to form a government to be prime minister. He offered that to Ana Brnabić, which is interesting because that would be the first female and first openly non-heterosexual prime minister of Serbia. Generally, it is, I think, the basic example of something called the pink ocean, when people just appoint someone or just claim they are like pro LGBT in order to either despite some sort of LGBT discrimination or some other support of discrimination. There is some debate that's happening right now, literally, like these days. We're not sure. I'm pretty sure that she's going to be the prime minister. But nevertheless, there is a lot of debate of whether she's the one, is going to be, because there are some fractions within those parties that find that as not okay. And we're going to see what's going to happen with that. However, even if that happens, probably the most power, she admits that she wants to be under mentorship of Alexander Vučić, which means probably he's going to just centralize more power with him, and rather, it's not like she was elected by populace and she's really lots of people support her. It's rather just some person that is powerful just said, look, you're going to have her, and probably going to have her, but it doesn't mean that this country necessarily became more open to LGBT and those issues. I noticed there are some articles claiming this is a good victory for LGBT rights, etc. I think it's more noting that this is something that first person that was not elected. Secondly, the still is not prime minister, and thirdly, generally there is huge opposition even within people who are ruling in the church, obviously, whether she's fine to be prime minister. So the last thing are international relations with Serbia, because I think they're all specific, and that might be used somewhere. So due to some past, this is the last thing. We need to answer if there are some questions, and then focus to our long workshop. So generally, because of the past, and because of the common religion, that is Orthodox religion, and because Slav identity, etc., Serbs perceive themselves very close to Russians, and generally perceive themselves as allies. And usually, lots of times in wars, they were allies, like World War I, World War II, etc. However, given that lots of funds come from European Union, still, and lots of people just generally want to live better. Most of the political parties in the parliament are pro-EU, and right now the parties that are ruling party is also pro-EU, despite the fact being nationalist. I think it just shows inability to some extent of European Union to just actually be checks and balance, because I think right now they have some bigger issues, either Brexit or generally dissatisfaction with the EU bureaucrats, or refugees also, which is why Serbia and Macedonia are important, because lots of refugees, Balkan route, so-called, etc. Given that, I think they are more likely simply to accept that there are some violations in terms of liberty for journalism, for minorities, and things like that happening in Serbia and Macedonia, for example, or some other countries. And I think for those reasons, they're not calling out that as much as they would. Recently, there were some protests that said the last election, presidential election, was rigged in some terms, not like completely, but in terms of some people were bribed, or forced, or coerced to vote for the dominant party that was also ruling party. I think you didn't correct at all, and until the protest escalated a little bit, and then they were like, okay, some of those things should be reconsidered. There was recently, I think 2 or 3 days ago, resolution from the European Parliament on Serbia that said that the elections were fair, albeit maybe some bad things, like maybe you should improve something about journalism, and train it to Kosovo, what sort of provocation, don't do that. But generally, I think they're more accepting towards this government, given that they need them for refugees and things like that. And generally, because they don't want to lose them to Russians. So a lot of countries didn't impose sanctions on Russia, despite some reports from the European Union. So Serbia is trying to have that neutrality position, sort of being really close to Russians and to the West as well. They're not part of the NATO, even though they recently they signed agreement with NATO that effectively allows NATO to move to Serbia just like that. This is not obviously something that Russians like. So then recently, again, they signed a deal with Russians that means that they're going to buy lots of military equipment from Russia, and they're going to participate in some parades with Russia, etc. Then again, West is not happy with that, but still, they're sort of maintaining other things. But however, given that they have problems, firstly, with status of Kosovo, I think this is one of the issues that inevitably, even some of the high-ranking officials from the EU say explicitly that Serbia will need to recognize Kosovo, or at least just normalize relations to Kosovo. And I explained why this is unlikely to happen in the near future. And secondly, because Croatia has power over Serbia. And there's something that happened in the past with Slovenia and Croatia. If Croatia wanted to be part of the European Union, or some really small part of the land, there was a huge dispute between Slovenia and Croatia. Slovenia were blocking Croatian entry to the EU unless for quite a long time. Still, Croats already just some of the things asking more minority rights for Croats in Serbia and things like that. I think that those, so mostly those things. So I think that those are the most of the things that I wanted to talk about. Are there any questions? I'm not sure I can see any questions. No, there are no any questions. Cool. So thanks for watching this. I hope this was useful. And bye bye.